thank you again for, this is, as we said, the third session, and actually it's one I really enjoy. So this is one of the ones I enjoy all my work, but this is one of the ones I enjoy because it is a bit of a brain teaser. It causes some great, I suppose, great debate in a room about accountability and how do we manage it. And it's something I enjoy speaking about because the difference when you get this right really makes life so much easier for everybody. And it's also about, when we look at it, there's a lot of things in holding people accountable that's counterintuitive, and I'm going to speak about those today. So coming from a psychology point of view, there's a lot of things that we think, oh, am I bullying? Am I hassling? Am I over-policing? You know, it's about challenging those assumptions that we have and getting comfortable with this, because accountability really is about protecting your business objectives. And the day you're not afraid to do it is the day that you have clearer, is the day that you have more respect from the people that you work with. People are more willing to work for you because actually we want to work for people we respect. We don't want to work for soft touches or busy fools. So today, as Bernie said, I will try and I'll impart some of the things that you can start doing today to make your business better, to find it easier to hold people accountable. So just a quick recap from the previous two sessions. I've sent out already, we've looked at the idea of management development. None of what I discuss in my sessions, you know, it's all interlinked. It's not mutually exclusive, so it's all interlinked. It's not that I'm forgetting what we've already done. It does fill into what we've already done. And you need a really good foundation to make this work properly. We also looked then at the idea of delivering on your promise. That is core to accountability. You need to have your structures in place in order to be able to hold people accountable. If you do not have proper parameters in place, it is very difficult to have an objective conversation with somebody about what you need them to do and what they're not doing. So we're building on a really strong foundation. We look at that idea, how that fits in a moment in the employment stages. We look at the importance of boundaries. So boundaries are really, really important, understanding where you are. And as humans, we like to push boundaries, just like if you saw cows out in a grazing system, they would push the wire to see what they can get away with. That's a really important concept as well. And it always comes back to timely intervention. So every time I speak, really, I'm going to talk about timing and time and space in the system, and, you know, making sure you're doing it well before you're under pressure, so that when you are under pressure, you do it properly. So again, we'll have, after today, we'll have another fact sheet to follow up on what's said today and just to support some of the talking today. I am going to disappoint everybody right now and say this is not easy, this is not simple, it's not a silver bullet. You do have to put the groundwork in, you do have to police, you do have to do things you think you shouldn't have to. You'll see intolerance creeping in, you'll wonder why somebody can't learn it as quickly as you do, you'll wonder how long you have to tell somebody how to do something before they get it. That is part of the learning phase. But when we do that really, really well and we establish that system, the system starts to take care of itself. So I will discuss that as we go through. So when we look at these employment stages, and we've spoken about this already, before employing, so you're putting that really big base, that really big foundation in place, and that is totally controllable. So much of accountability is about having those contracts correct, having your rosters correct, having a lot of clarity in your system. And that's totally controllable. So that's sitting down and saying, what are my tolerances? What is allowable in my business and what is not? And actually even going even further and saying, what's poor performance, what's good performance, what's exceptional performance. So you should be very clear about your tolerances. I think we spoke the last day, we talked about, you know, getting to, or I spoke to Bernie during the week about it, you're talking about getting to the same place. So does it really matter that somebody takes a little bit longer than you do? You've got to set out those tolerances, but have very clear understanding of what is correct or incorrect, so that when you're holding somebody accountable, you have objective evidence. And that conversation, you know, businesses everywhere always say to me, I don't like it. I don't like holding people accountable. I don't like telling people off. I don't like it. As if there are other people who do. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody really thoroughly enjoys that unless they're completely sadistic. And we're not going to go there because that's a totally different conversation. What you've got to understand is that this is uncomfortable for everybody. But it comes back to our first session, that if you understand why you're doing it, it makes it much easier. And that why is protecting your business objectives. As an employer of choice, that why is protecting your employees. So you're holding people accountable so that you are protecting your employees to make sure they perform well, and that you're not punishing good employees by tolerating poor employees. So we've got that big basis that's controllable. The accountability sits very much into this section here. So in accountability is you have to set that standard. Now, these are first impressions. People say, oh, I'll give them a chance, I'll let them off, I don't want to be on their back straight away. You must set standards from the very, very beginning, because it is so difficult to claw back if you don't. So we end up, I let it go, I won't hold them accountable. I know they're doing it wrong, but I don't want to be on their back, I don't want to be seen as draconian, and I won't hold them accountable, I won't challenge them. And at some point down the line, something else happens. The person who's done that for the last 6 months and you've never corrected them first, does it again because they've never been told they shouldn't do it. And then you get a bad phone call or something happens and you scream at this person or you shout at this person or you really have a go at this person. And you've created inconsistency because this person never knew they shouldn't do what they were doing because you didn't correct them. And now you're having you're letting go on them, and it's quite negative. And you've created inconsistency. Now the problem with creating inconsistency is you sow doubt. And now we have an employee who's looking at you going, oh, that's not a side to this person. I don't understand why I'm being punished. This is a side to the person I've never seen before. What's going on? Maybe this person isn't who I think they are. And you've now created a doubt in that person. We have an error in thinking called a confirmation bias. So now instead of looking for what you do well, the employee is going to start looking for other supporting evidence that you are an irrational human being and that they are right and you're wrong. And in this case, they are correct. You are irrational. As they've seen is you have had an irrational explosion about something that that person has done for 6 months that they didn't know they weren't supposed to do. So we have to set standards from the beginning. We have to create a clear first impression that you are strict but fair. We're going to speak about strict but fair. All the research and literature shows that people respond to employers, to parents, to authority figures who are strict but fair. Blowing up at somebody 6 months down the line for doing something they didn't know they weren't supposed to do is perceived as unfair. So you're not only being strict, you're being a monster and you're being unfair, which goes against being strict and fair. So we need to be very important that we set up first impressions from the beginning. And that's really this part of accountability. And you need to think about what can you set in place now today. What can you control here that's going to make this easier for you to have those conversations? So that first impression is absolutely critical. We want to send those standards. You do have to police hard in the beginning. When you do this really, really well, though, your other employees will police for you. So you set up the standards with your employees, and they will start to regulate the system for you. So what happens is you police and you set standards, a new employee comes in and the other employees say, no, that's not how we do things around here. That's not an acceptable standard. So yes, there is hard work in the beginning, but that does pay off. Now, what we tend to do as humans, we take the easy option, particularly under pressure, we will take the easy option. The easy option is to let it slip. The easy option is to let it go. That is a false economy because it hurts you hard later down the line. It hits you hard later down the line. So we need to find, if we see somebody doing it incorrectly, we need to correct them. And I was speaking to a group in Ireland last year, and we had a farmer speaking, and he was really good. He said, nobody minds a correction, but nobody likes a telling off. Now, a correction is when you intervene in a timely fashion, but a telling off is when later down the line you have a go with that person. So we'll speak through that a little bit more in one of the later slides. And then that's going to really, really fit in here to this ongoing employment, this continuous working relationship. Now, this is a tricky one because I've had a couple of conversations with farmers recently in Ireland saying that some of their employees have kind of changed behavior. If your system changes, people will test boundaries again. So you have set up a really good system here. Everybody's being held accountable, but something different happens. For example, in Ireland, we found, one of the questions I was asked was some foreign workers had started to take more sick days during COVID, had started pushing boundaries a little bit. They're only pushing boundaries because the system has changed. So they're just re-establishing where they stand. Now, that is totally human behavior. For anybody who has children, you will see that children will always spot a gap and try to push the boundary. So it's the same thing with people. If the system changes, if they perceive that maybe there's some unfair treatment somewhere, they'll start pushing the boundaries as well. So accountability is not exclusive to this area. It is set up by doing before employing the employment basics very well, and it totally feeds into this ongoing employment. If we get to a point down the line where an employee who has been, held accountable and is working well in the system begin to if an employee starts to perceive that relationships have become unfair, well, then this ongoing working relationship actually becomes quite strained. So we have to keep that accountability. We have to review what the standards are regularly to remind people what's going on. And yes, for people who are busy, who would prefer not to have to do this, if you are seeking to have a robust business where people are doing what they need to do and you don't have to police all the time, you've got to put hard work into this. So again, I would always say to farmers, you're not afraid of hard work. You've put the work into your system. You've put the work into your cows. This is the phase of your business now where you're moving it forward. You're putting work and effort into the people that you work with. So the importance of boundaries is really, really important. And I just want to explain this as we go down. Just before I move on, actually, just to remind you that we do have Dairy Australia, and the people in dairy have all the resources that will help you to get this employment basics right, feeding into the accountability section of the initial employment and making sure that you have that healthy ongoing employment relationship. So look, I just put this in here. I've got some Aussie rules here. We've got some rugby union here. And if you've got a grazing system, this is an example of a grazing system. These all have boundaries. If you're in the EU, and I'm sure it's the same in Australia, you know, food production is the most regulated of all the sectors in the EU because we're putting food into the human chain. So it's, you know, it's heavily regulated already. It kind of amuses me a little bit that farmers kind of push against this idea of holding people accountable, because as an industry, you are held incredibly accountable. I know that Melva said that today there was a talk about industrial manslaughter. So, you know, you're talking about regulation all of the time. You're talking about boundaries all of the time of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And you should not be afraid to put those heavy boundaries into your business. And I have these ideas here because, look, I could be, I could be very imaginative as a rugby player, as an Aussie rules player. I could be very imaginative within the pitch, highly skillful, highly talented, able to do incredible things. But the minute my ball goes outside, that's it, it stops. So it's really thinking about where are your boundaries, what's acceptable. And we could call these the hard laws. You know, these are the hard rules. And in here, you can have some soft rules. So how I get there, you have to have certain milk quality. How you get there is where the flexibility is. And people would often say to me, oh, accountability, it's taking away autonomy, it's killing imagination. It really isn't. That's an easy option. That's an escapist, trying to escape from it. That's an excuse. So what we need to think about is the idea of boundaries being really, really important, and that you understand what your hard and soft rules are. So if you think about regulation, I quite often do an exercise with discussion groups in the UK and Ireland, and I would say develop your fantasy dairy team, and we'll get really switched on businesses will say, okay, this is where all my players play, but I see government regulation, I see health and safety, I see compliance, I see all of that as the lines around the pitch. So they're actually even putting in that they're the rules of engagement, they're the rules of the game that they're allowed to play in. And they would actually, so the really switched on businesses will see that that's where government regulation comes in, and that government is on the pitch and that regulation is on the pitch. But for the businesses really thinking about it, they don't see them as players holding them back. They see them as the boundaries within which they play. So it's understanding in your business, where is the regulation, what is the compliance that you have to have, and what is acceptable, and clearly articulating that regularly to your business, to the people in your business, so that people know where they stand. It will come up in every single talk that I do. The leading cause of job dissatisfaction is lack of role clarity. And clarity, part of role clarity is accountability. What can I get away with? What must I not even attempt? What should not even occur to me? So it's really about creating strict boundaries. And I just something popped into my head there. I lived in the UK for ages, for a number of years, and policing is very, very, particularly traffic police are very, very, is very strict. And I had moved home to Ireland, and within a couple of weeks, I did an illegal move on the road that I wouldn't dream of doing in the UK. It wouldn't even have come into my head, but I was in Ireland, so I thought, that's fine, nobody will notice. So we've got to be careful that if you've got to set up what is allowable in your business. And that is the importance of boundaries. So for anybody out there who thinks, I don't like doing this, you live this every single day. And holding your employees accountable within your business is just an extension of what you are doing already. It is just an extension of protecting your business. So again, it's thinking about, you know, where's the boundaries? I always use the example of the grazing system, because, you know, the cow will graze beyond the wire as far as she can until you give her sufficient reason not to. And that's the sufficient shock in the wire. So it's really about understanding where your boundaries are and holding people to those boundaries. When that ball goes out, it's dead, it's gone. You have to start the next set of play. So make sure that you are very clear about what your boundaries are and what is acceptable. And that's going to fill into the next idea. So protecting, the importance of boundaries is really about protecting your business objectives. Don't talk, you know, realign your head, realign your mindset and say, I'm not going to tell this person off, I'm going to protect my business objectives. Because we know straight away that if you do not do it correctly in terms of health and safety, in terms of food standards, in terms of hygiene, in terms of everything else, milk quality, you will be held accountable. You will be penalized. So you shouldn't be afraid to have the same severity within your business. You should not be afraid to hold people accountable within your business. And one of the main reasons you should do that is to create role clarity. You know, think of the teacher that you liked most in school. You didn't like the teacher who showed favoritism. You didn't like the teacher who had pets. You liked the teacher who was strict but fair. We see a lot of work in terms of, you know, business psychology in the US, talking about books like Mindset by Carol Dweck, Grit by Angela Duckworth. They will talk about children responding best to teachers who are challenging but fair. So we see that across employers who are challenging but fair. We continuously see that across all businesses, that we want consistency in behavior. And so protecting your business objective will help you to create that consistency. Also, that's coming straight back to your why. So one of the first days we looked at the idea of the circle, Simon Sinek's why, coming straight back to why am I here, what am I trying to do, and does this person's behavior impinge on what it is I'm trying to achieve? So if I'm buying somebody's time and they're late, well, they're impinging on my why. They're taking away from me. Now, if you are going to hold somebody accountable for being late, you have to honor it at the other end and not keep them longer than you're supposed to. So it has that, because otherwise that's inconsistent. And inconsistency is always perceived as being unfair. So we need to think about protecting our business objective and understanding how we're going to achieve that. Then you might say it's protecting your yes by saying no. Now, there's a very good book by a well-known negotiator called William Ury, U-R-Y, and he talks about a positive no, saying no and getting to yes. It's much easier to say no to somebody. It's much easier to challenge somebody's behavior if you understand what you're protecting. If you're going out there just to have a go at them, you feel badly afterwards. But if you do it properly and you hold people accountable, you don't feel badly afterwards. Actually, they don't feel badly afterwards. They admire and respect that you held them accountable. And I often think of a story. I worked with quite a large operation in the UK, and they have a groundworks division. And I was discussing this with the groundworks manager, and he was saying that he noticed that they were doing some work around the central office, and he noticed that one of his employees was kind of skiving off very slightly. And he went out to challenge them. And he was surprised to see the employee walk away with a bounce in his step, held head high, shoulders back. And he was quite surprised because he assumed, well, I've just had a little bit of a go at this guy. And I thought he'd walk away a little bit with his tail between his legs. But the guy walked away, you know, upright and proud. And he said, why would that be? And it's as simple as this, that if you take the time to tell me what I should be doing, that shows you respect me, that shows you trust me, that shows you think you're speaking to me as an adult. You're not avoiding the tough conversation with me in case I can't cope with it. So we need to put our we need to put our feet in the other person's shoes. And if we don't hold people accountable, interestingly, we are basically saying to the other person, I don't trust you, I don't believe you, I don't think you're grown up enough to take this serious conversation. That's how it's perceived at the other end, which, you know, we think, oh, we're going to come across as bullies. We're going to come across negatively to that person. Actually, not holding them accountable comes across more negatively than holding them accountable. So that's a mind shift. And I talked about being counterintuitive. That is a mind shift that we need to think about. What am I saying by not saying something, by saying something or not saying something? What is perceived at the other end? And be very clear that if you are not holding people accountable, you are saying to them, you are communicating that you don't respect your own business, you don't respect your own authority, or you don't respect them enough to take the adult conversation. So it's a little bit like talking down to them. If you treat them like a child, they will behave like a child. And because I mentioned earlier, children will push boundaries, they'll start saying, well, I got away with that. What else can I get away with? And it's not necessarily malicious. It's just establishing boundaries. Humans establish boundaries. So really sit back and think about, where have you not challenged somebody and what has been the outcome? Did they like you for it, or did they become more disruptive? The day that you held somebody accountable, did they, what was the outcome of that? And just start to really reflect on, what's the worst thing that will happen if you hold somebody accountable? Now, honestly, if you hold somebody accountable, you're not actually holding them accountable, actually. You're being inconsistent and telling them off. If down the line you attack somebody for something they're doing that they didn't know they weren't supposed to do, what's the worst that could happen? They'd quite probably leave. They could easily walk out because they don't understand where this unfair punishment has come from. So we need to be mindful about what you are creating. And again, I would say to every business I speak to, today is the first day of the rest of your lives. Try this. Start out objectively, get your business practices in place, get your rosters in place, and understand what it is that you're trying to achieve by holding people accountable. So when you have those conversations, it's much easier. So let's talk through some of these ideas when we look at accountability. So accountability and holding people accountable, we need timely intervention. So when you want to get somebody to do something appropriately, you need timely intervention. Time is everything. Under pressure, I will say words in anger that I cannot retract. You cannot retract words said in anger. So you need to be mindful of what you say to anybody at any time, because how is that going to be perceived? Yes, that is time consuming. You might even think that's ferociously boring, but if that's where your business is, and that's where you are in the business, at a position where you are facilitating other people to do the work, you've got to start thinking about this. What is the impact of the words that I have on my staff? So we need timely intervention. If you know that somebody has done something incorrectly, do your absolute best not to go into that conversation blind. Rehearse it. If you know you've got to challenge somebody because of poor performance, say for example, you realize milk quality has been down or something negative has happened, you should rehearse that in your head. So you should visualize that conversation. What am I going to say to them? If you've got somebody who works for you who's particularly capable with words and can kind of get themselves out of a lot of issues just by being clever with how they reply, anticipate their move. So if they say this, what's your answer? So you're doing contingency planning. Just like you contingency plan, if it's a tough year, if it's a dry year, if it's a wet year, if I've got calf health issues, you're contingency planning. It's the same with people. If you have to have a tough conversation with somebody and you need to get your point across, make sure you are anticipating their likely responses. Typically, if you're going to hold somebody accountable, you're going to get it seen as a challenge. So our limbic system, so the prehistoric wiring of our brain, is going to see holding somebody accountable, if done incorrectly, as a challenge. They're going to see it as a threat. So they might aggress back. They might get a bit mouthy and start talk back at you. They might freeze. They might be paralyzed into inaction, or they might really retract and move away from you. So it's really about thinking in terms of time, getting that conversation right and making it as objective as possible. Now, if something happens and I go in straight away, the likelihood is I'm going to be emotional about it. We need accountability to be logical and objective. You cannot be logical and objective if you have not set boundaries in the first place. If you do not have good contracts in place that say what is expected and what you do not want your staff to do, it is very difficult to challenge them in an objective manner. Really effective holding of accountability, you should be challenging the behavior, not the person. So saying, this is unacceptable, we do not do this around here, as opposed to saying, you're rubbish, you're completely awful, you're the worst person I've ever met, what are we doing here? Nobody would hire you, I must be a saint to have you, your mother's dreadful, your cousin's dreadful, and really making it personal. You will do that if you're not timely in your intervention. So if you get to that point, if you're not holding people accountable, you will get to that point and you can't retract it. So it's very important we're thinking about being timely in our intervention. With that timely being in the intervention, we need consistency. So part of that timely intervention is consistency. You need to show consistency to create clarity. So I started off at the beginning and said, If you do not hold somebody accountable from day one, you're going to be seen as inconsistent when you attack them later down the line for doing something they never knew they weren't supposed to do. So we need to be really consistent in that, and that's the strict but fair, which I refer to. This feedback loop is huge. You know, this is a dramatic difference between good employers and weaker employers. A feedback loop is always coming back to me first. If they're my staff, I have set up the system. I have asked them to do this work. What is it about me that prevented them doing the job properly? So first and foremost, a consistent and fair employer is going to have a feedback loop that says, what did I do wrong to prevent them doing their job properly? Okay, now this is the difference between can't and won't. If somebody can't do their job, that is absolutely my fault. They can't do it because I haven't given them sufficient training, I haven't given them sufficient resources, I haven't given them enough time to get the job done. That is my fault. That is something that I have to rectify. So that is can't. If, hand on your heart, you believe you have given, and you'd go through the checklist in your head, did I give them the right instructions? Did I give them sufficient time to do it? Did I give them the right resources? You know, are they capable of doing this job, or am I expecting too much of them? If, hand on your heart, you believe you have given every possibility for that person to do their job right, and they don't, well, then that's a won't scenario. They won't do the job, and that's an attitude problem, and that is absolutely challengeable. Now, what we find in the workplace is somebody does the job wrong. It's actually my fault, but I crucify them for it. And that's where we get inconsistency. And that's where we get people feeling really bitter towards their employers because they weren't given the opportunity to do the thing properly, and they're also being punished for that. So we need that consistent feedback loop that goes through that very first reaction is why? Why couldn't that person do their job? What did I do wrong? And this is really critical for unit managers. If you have a really robust system, your employees will come to you and tell them why they why they can't do the job in future. I can't do that because you haven't done this, this, and this. And they'll tell you what they need. But that only happens if you have a consistent and fair system, where the employee says, you know what you asked me to do, it's unrealistic because I don't have enough time, or we need more resources than you said we did, or I really don't understand what you're talking about, can we go through it again? So that's the system self-regulating. When you have a robust and consistent system, the system will self-regulate. So I talk about accountability, you know, being work that you have to put into it. It is short-term pain for long-term gain. If you set up a system, it will self-regulate. So you've got to police it until it becomes self-regulating. And yes, that policing is hard work. And yes, it's boring. And yes, you prefer not to have to do it. But you know, nothing that's worth having comes easy. So you've got to put that time into it. I've referred to that strict but fair already. You can't get away from that. You know, strict but fair, you know it yourself, it's intuitively right. You respond to somebody who's strict but fair. You don't respect a busy fool. You don't respect somebody who doesn't respect their own business enough to hold you accountable. You will start looking for gaps in the system to see what other boundaries you can push. Do not be afraid to be strict but fair. That is very, very difficult to do if you do not have time in the system. That fairness, you do not come across as fair if you are emotional, if you're under pressure, and if you're intolerant. So you do need timely intervention to be able to work strict but fair properly. If you're in a reactive system where you're always finding out after the fact, where you're finding out in a negative way because something bad has happened, and you're responding straight away rather than taking, you know, as you know, from a mindfulness point of view, we say here in Ireland, you know, smell the roses. So you're breathing in heavily and cool the porridge. You're exhaling to calm yourself down, getting into a place where you won't react emotionally. You cannot do that if you do not have time in the system. And that's going to be perceived as inconsistent. So that feedback loop is critical. It is an absolute hallmark of effective leaders. And that feedback loop is fair because that's the leader, that's the employer holding themselves accountable as well. So that's showing fairness because not only am I holding everybody else accountable, I'm holding myself accountable too. And we would see that as an employer saying, I'm sorry you couldn't get your job done. That's my fault. I didn't give you enough resources to do it. I didn't give you sufficient time to do it. No problem. I'll help you out or I'll sort that out for you. So that's me holding myself accountable and having to apologize for my wrongdoing within that relationship, within that task. And that's showing strict but fair. I'm holding myself accountable to you. That's being consistent. That's working the feedback loop really, really well. So again, time is everything. We then look at this fairness, this idea of strict but fair and fairness. So we need a swift punishment and something that fits the crime. Now, the word punishment is often perceived negatively. There's no real other word for that. I've been working in leadership for a long time now, and there's no better word than punishment. It's very different. It is the opposite to reward. We can't talk about consequence because reward's a consequence. So we need to talk about punishment. Swift punishment is this idea here of a correction rather than a telling off. So when we do it properly, it's perceived as a correction. It's not perceived as a telling off. And when we, the swift punishment should be directly after the fact, as soon as possible after the fact. It's also, as soon as possible where you can have a rational conversation. Let's be very clear about that. If I see something dreadful happening and I wade in, there is a very high probability I will say the wrong thing because I'm furious and I'm not logical and I want to kill the person standing in front of me. So we need to have a mechanism that says, if I speak to this person right now, it's not going to go well. I need to calm myself down. However, that person should not for a second feel they got away with it. So it should sound something like, come to me in 10 minutes. I'm too angry now to speak about this. I need to calm down. Come into my office in 10 minutes. Please do not do the extraordinarily unethical thing of, I'll talk to you tomorrow in the hope that they'll stew on it overnight. That is just so unethical. You do not know what's going on in somebody's head, and that could be a burden, an extra burden to somebody who's already vulnerable. So we'd hear this a lot in workplaces. I grab them on a Friday and I tell them I want to speak to them on Monday morning so that they can stew on it. That is just, horrendous. So when something happens, you need to deal with it there and then. Within the next hour, within the next 20 minutes, half an hour, they certainly shouldn't go home with that. So that swift punishment is critical, and it should fit the crime. Let's go back to my guy who doesn't want to police the new employee, who doesn't want to be seen as always on them at their back, and later down the line attacks them for something. That does not fit the crime, because they did not know there was a crime in the first place. The employee did not know they were doing something wrong. So when somebody attacks them, it doesn't fit the crime. They're going, well, this is completely disproportionate. I've been doing this all this time, and now you're exploding over it. Why didn't you just tell me in the first place I shouldn't have done it? So we have a huge difference between me feeling fair and your behavior. And that's important to think about, swift and fair. So we've got strict and fair about your behavior across the whole system. So strict but fair, so strict to everybody. You're holding yourself accountable. You're holding all your employees accountable. There's no favoritism, strict but fair. And that fairness then also comes into the punishment fits the crime. So it's swift, it's directly after the fact. I'm asked a lot about appraisals and reviews and systems. They have been really, really dramatically abused in larger organizations where they basically get a body of evidence of everything you've done during the year, including the negative stuff, and they throw that at you during your appraisal. That is not an appraisal, that's a punishment. It's also really dangerous for your business because you're potentially leaving it down the line, maybe as much as 12 months before you hold somebody accountable for what they did. They've forgotten it. It's a bit like smacking the dog the following week for something they did this week. You've got to do it straight away, because then there's no connection between what happened and the punishment. So we need people to understand where the connection was. What did I do wrong, and what's the consequence for it? And I've mentioned this already, and I really like it. I got this specific idea of correction versus telling off from a farmer, as I mentioned earlier, in Ireland, saying we'll all take a correction. We'll all understand that we're not going to be brilliant at something straight away, but if you tell me off, if you make it personal, if you make it petty, if you treat me like a child later down the line, I don't like that. And I don't take that well. And, if you're a belligerent individual, you may well go out of your way now to do the thing you were told not to do. And that happens because we've got different personalities playing in the business. We've got one person who's going to take it as oh my gosh, I should never step outside the line again. And I'll be absolutely mediocre rather than risk the wrath of my employer. Or you could have the employee who says, oh, you don't like me doing that. Right, let's see how much of that I can do to rise you. So we need to be very careful about what systems we are setting up. So the correction versus telling off, when you do it straight away, it's a correction. When you wait and you blast it at the person later down the line for whatever reason, that's a telling off, and that nobody likes that. And by the way, you will feel rubbish after that as well. So it's often because we tell off, because we correct inappropriately, that we have a negative taste in our mouth about holding people accountable. because you remember the last time you do it. You don't remember what was said, but you remember the feeling. So humans remember the emotion rather than the logical argument of what was said. They remember that they felt badly about it. So I remembered I attacked that person some years ago, and I felt rotten afterwards. So to me, accountability makes me feel rotten. I don't want to engage in that. And that's because we did it inappropriately. 5 minutes, okay. So then on this last one here, we've got the idea of support. To be able to be consistent, to be able to be fair, you need to provide training and learning. Now, I am going to go into this training and learning and bringing somebody on that journey very, very specifically in some of the next sessions. And you need to have resources available. You cannot punish somebody for not doing their job if they can't do their job. We're straight back up to my comment up here where I said can't versus won't. If somebody can't do the job because you have not given them the skill set to do it, well, then we're going to be in trouble. You know, that's going to breed resentment. That's seen as unfair. We're straight up here again, it's seen as unfair. So you need to provide the training and learning and the resources to do the job properly. Of course, this is the tricky one. We come across this as a really, really difficult thing in farming. I'm asked it all the time, you know, how many times do you have to tell somebody how to do a job? We need to strip it right back. And I will say in every talk I give, you're farming, if you grew up farming, you're farming since you were 2, you ran out the door after mommy and daddy, you have a huge amount of skill set you don't even know you have because you learn through observation. So we need to strip back our tolerance and say, one telling is not enough. 50 tellings may not be enough. And I was thinking of it, how would I best describe this to farmers? You milk your cows. Most of you are milking twice a day. So you've got animals who are coming in twice a day to your parlour, or moving to your parlour twice a day to be milked. But you'll still have the girls at the back of the herd who won't come in and who are frustrating. And you're thinking, come on, look, cow, you do this every single day, twice a day. Could you not just walk into the parlour first? Why do I have to hunt you into the parlour? And that's just some humans hold back. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. You know, you could have a cow for 5, 6 years still holding back on every milking twice a day. So we need to understand that people's behavior is different, that there is a different learning capacity, there's a different incentive behind why people behave. But if you are strict and fair, if you are consistent in your accountability, if you set out clear guidelines as to what is acceptable behavior, if you hold people accountable all of the time, people will conform. And they will relish the fact that they are in a system that is predictable and that they have role clarity, rather than thinking, dear God, what am I facing today? What mood is my employer going to be in today? Who's going to be the pet today? Who's going to be the figure of hate? You know, it's about creating, I would mention this also, a psychological contract of safety where people in your business know what to expect. They know if they do it wrong, what to expect, and they will actually put their hand up and say, I made a mistake. And they'll come to you before you ever have to tell them off or correct them, before you ever have to correct them, I should say, because they know that by coming to you, they will be fairly handled. So it's really about having time and space. It's setting standards clearly from the beginning. Please do not shy away from this. This is the difference between mediocre employees and really happy employees who understand where they stand and who tell other people, I enjoy working for this business. They're strict but fair. I know where I stand. And that puts pride in my work, because then when I do it well, I feel good about doing it well. And I feel good about doing it well for my employer. So it's very important that you have timely intervention. This can only happen if you've got time and space in your system. If you are on the back foot, you will react emotionally. We know that reacting emotionally may lead to words said in anger not being able to be retracted. You need to take time to understand this. But first and foremost, criticize the behavior, not the person. This is not the milk standard we accept here. This is what did you do wrong? And you can put lots of things in place. There was a brilliant question came through during the week, and I'll answer that question and give you some more pointers as to what you can actually do. So in summary, from accountability, it is the whole way through that relationship. It is from the very beginning right through to maintaining healthy relationships, that people know where they stand and what's expected of them. In your head, say, is this strict? Is it fair? Do people know where they stand? Do people know what's not acceptable? What have I allowed to slip and what do I need to correct today? And that conversation looks a little bit like this. You bring in your team members. You say, to date, I have been a little bit sloppy and holding you accountable for being late. That is not happening anymore. A shocking statistic. Think about this. If somebody's 10 minutes late to your business every day, across a working year, that is a 48-hour week. Okay, 10 minutes. 10 minutes on its own doesn't look big. 10 minutes cumulatively is quite an amount of time. However, you have to be strict but fair. So if you're going to hold people accountable for being in on time to your work, and I know this is slightly different in Australia because you've got strict employment law, you need to let that person go when you say you will let them go, without guilt, without judgment. So it's really about starting now and saying to your staff, we are not strict enough on this. I'm not strict enough on you know, I'm not being strict enough on disinfecting the cows. I'm not being strict enough on X, Y, Z. We need to take this on today. From now on, these are the standards I'm setting, and I will hold you accountable to it. And I want to know if this is working or if it's not working. Do not be afraid to do this. This is something that will significantly reduce your stress levels long term, and it will really set you up as that employer of choice where people want to work for you because they will know where they stand. This idea of boundaries, you are working in a regulated system already. It is nothing new. It is just an extension of what you already do. Use those, use the set boundaries that are there. Go to the People in Dairy website. Get all of the processes in place at the beginning so you have good structure. And timely intervention, you know, don't allow it to go down the line because that's the easy option. I can't face that today, I'll leave it. You know, when you hear that conversation in your head, hear it and stop yourself and say, I know I want to avoid this conversation, but that's the easy thing to do. It's not the right thing to do. I will do the right thing. And that'll save, it's a headache to me today, but it'll save a nightmare to me down the line. So it's very important to think about that timely intervention, about being fair, and reflect on your own life. Who are the people you admired? You know, what teachers did you admire? What you know, club captain or coach did you admire? It will nearly always be the person who was strict but fair, who challenged you sufficiently but gave you boundaries on how to do that. So reflect on your own life and realize that you too respond better to somebody who's strict but fair, and that you too prefer to be handled properly. And if you can't do it, if you can't do it because you weren't given the ability to do it, that the other person takes responsibility. That's very comforting. And then what support do you need to go back and say, am I giving my staff enough support from a time perspective, emotionally, from a learning perspective, from a resources perspective, to allow them to do their job as well as possible? So quite a lot of information in there. As I said, I will bring, put that fact sheet together for you. There was a question that came, a fantastic question that came during the week. I would be delighted to answer any questions if Melva or Bernie want to facilitate that.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Nollaig. Very thorough, and some great messages there for everybody to take home. We have got some questions. I've got one here. Could you give some examples of punishment that are reasonable and work well in a workplace?
Okay, so that's coming back up to this one here about punishment. Look, a correction is literally saying to somebody, that's not how you do it, this is how you do it. So, of course, we'd have, so first of all, set out your standards of what's acceptable and intervene. So when somebody is doing something wrong, stop them and say, that's not correct. Get them to decide, do not humiliate them. If you think this is happening in the business, so this is one of the things, if you want to prevent a rumor mill and negative talk going on, what you do is you take the individual aside and you say, please don't, this is not how we do it, not how we do it around here. You then bring the group, you bring your staff together to re-get that message across. You do not hang that person. So Bernie is my member of staff, he's done something wrong. I don't bring, I'm not going to bring all my staff together and say, listen, did you see what Bernie did the other day? We need to stop that happening. You're saying, this has happened. Bernie knows it's happened. Everybody else knows it's Bernie, but you haven't humiliated him by mentioning him. Say, this can't happen. How are we going to get over this? And you go through the steps. Now, Bernie is sufficiently embarrassed himself anyway. So that in itself, being held accountable in itself is a punishment. I feel uncomfortable. I want to do better. So that's one of the things. Just holding somebody accountable in the first place is sufficient punishment, because that person, we absolutely need to believe that people want to do their best for you. You have to believe that. You've got to you need to believe. I had a scenario actually yesterday, just here. I'm my parents' farm, my brother's farming, and he's a bit of a hero to my children. And my son did something yesterday, and he was really uncomfortable. He was really upset. And I was going to my brother to ask. It was actually about leaving the gate open or closed or whatever, typical farming scenario. And my son got really uncomfortable because my brother's like a hero to him. So he just doing the thing wrong in the first place was sufficient punishment to him, because he had to go and say to my brother, I've done something wrong. and that my poor kid was tortured. Like he was really stressed about it. So when we set up a system where you are fair, people will feel sufficiently punished by the fact they have to be corrected. So that's one of the things. I suppose one of the other way you would hold people accountable is, if somebody is coming late to you, you've got to hurt them. If somebody is hurting your business, you've got to hurt them. So if somebody is coming late to you, then you dock their pay. Pretty quickly, they will come back online. Or you sit down and say, I will dock your pay if we can't rectify this. What's the issue? And it may turn out that they've got something, they've got to care for an elderly relative at home and they can't get out the gate when they wanted to, and you rearrange their hours, and that helps them to be at your place on time, and they kind of owe you one then. It's a concept of persuasion in psychology. They're kind of obliged to you because you have made an effort for them. So punishment doesn't have to be whips and chains. That's what the word conjures up. But punishment is just making somebody feel sufficiently uncomfortable that they did it wrong. And if you've got a robust system, they will do that already. Nobody wants to get things wrong. They want to perform for you. So do hold them accountable if they're but set that out from the beginning. If you are late to my business, I will dock pay. If you put antibiotics into my milk, this is what will happen. Set them out from the very beginning. If you allow my cows to go out on the road, if you don't water the cows, set out what is punishable behavior. That is absolutely what you need to do from the beginning, rather than somebody does something and you turn around and you slam them with a sledgehammer and they never knew that sledgehammer was there. That's inconsistency. So decide what it is that is fair punishment in your business. And that's a little bit of a cop-out. I'm not giving specific examples, I suppose, but decide what is punishable in your business and set those out from the very beginning. Do not be afraid to have those up in your farm office. If this happens, if there's antibiotics, if this happens, this is the consequence to those things happening. Hold people accountable for it. I have a client in the UK who says, I don't mind you making a mistake. I don't mind you doing something wrong. But what I really mind is if you lie about it. That is absolutely punishable. That is completely unacceptable. So he kind of talks about celebrating honesty in the workplace, where you come forward with the thing you've done, because hiding it is far more dangerous it's far more dangerous to the business if you hide something than if you come forward and tell us about it. And yeah, you might get slagged off a little bit for doing something stupid, but you know that already, that you shouldn't have done it. So, it's fair is fair. Take it like a man, etc., or take it like an adult.
A farmer came to me the other day and he said, I have a number of farms, and they said they have a safety program that they've put in place where they have an app and they have to take a photo of the motorbike before they get on it and make sure the air is right, the frame's right, and just a quick photo before they get on it. Excuse me. And they have to do it each day. If they don't do it, then the company feels a bit exposed, because that's what they said, that the policy is in place. They all agreed to it. They go to the manager and they say, you don't have this job done. And the manager says, well, we're just too busy. We're doing other things. We're carving. We've got other. Where's the point where you have to actually say, well, we have to have some flexibility in?
So what you...
They're trying to meet the company policy versus getting the job done.
Yeah, so what you would do, first of all, is you would look at the system and see, is the system overburdened, and why this is, why are things happening? So we need, it's not just about putting a Band-Aid or a plaster over the injury, it's about doing a root cause analysis as well. So what's the systemic failure? Why is it making it difficult for people to do this? So kind of thing you might hear is, well, we've got a policy for no mobile phone usage, but you expect me to take a picture of the equipment with my phone. So you've got an inconsistency there. So that it might be looking at what are the inconsistencies that are preventing that. Well, you don't like me taking my phone around with me, or I don't want to break my phone in my pocket. So I don't have the phone on me. So you're looking at those kind of things. What's holding people back from doing it? Getting the job done is important. Brand reputation, the view of the industry, social media is exponentially important. So it's where you're putting the emphasis on what's important. Do the people in the business realize that if we have a breach of health and safety and that becomes publicly known, we will be audited, we will get in severe trouble, we will be penalized, we will be at a point where we can't actually afford to employ you because we've got to pay so much money out. So it sounds to me that a little bit like they're doing it for lip service at the moment. They don't truly believe it. Now, unfortunately, that happens a lot in farming. We have to do this. We're supposed to do it. It's government regulation. I don't like doing it. And that's the tone that's coming down from management. I don't want to have to do this. I know it's stupid. I know we should, isn't this really annoying, but we have to do it. We have to set the tone from the top. If I believe my boss isn't engaged in it, why would I be? You know, if I believe that my boss thinks this is a con, well, then I'm not going to invest in that. So we have to set the tone from the beginning and very clearly express why. We're coming straight back to that circle, that golden circle, that red dot in the middle. Why are we doing this? Because your safety is paramount to our business. Our reputation is paramount to our business. And if we infringe on that reputation in any way, that is absolutely detrimental to our business, and that is not tolerable. So it's enforcing that message. The message there to me, and I hear it all the time, it's lip service, it isn't believed. And of course, if you don't get a message across without true belief in it, people don't buy into it. So I would say in that scenario that you describe, you've got possibly somebody who's saying getting on with the business is more important than the regulation we're talking about. So, you know, just take the picture, will you? And that message is wrong. So it's re-stripping it back and giving it convincing arguments that people buy into. So again, we come back to imagination. You know, if this has to be done, how do I say it? How do I implement it? How do I do it in a way that people absolutely believe in it? And it might be something as simple as a prompt, or we see this a huge amount of information about nudge theory. So giving a prompt to somebody to do it, they might literally just need to laminate a sheet that says take a picture and stick it on the seat of the piece of machinery, just as a prompt to get people to remember. But if you want to institute behavior, you have to police it in the beginning. So that unit manager should know what work is coming up, what piece of machinery is going to be used, say it's an ATV or, you know, a quad or something. They know that's being used, and being there and present while the person who's going to use it goes to use it. So you'd have that policing in the beginning. Time consuming, frustrating, yes it is, but it's a long-term gain if you get it right.
Great, thanks Nollaig. One last question, Melba.
Yep. Hi Nollaig, you're doing a great job tonight, by the way. I'll read this one that's been texted in to me. The question reads, how can we get the message through, bracket instructions, close bracket, to the younger generation? The frequency of repetition gets annoying when they are so distracted. Electronic gadgetry seems to have made many of them unable to listen or filter the words spoken to their brain. Is it a case of them growing up with text and that's how they prefer to receive information? Their capacity to hold information also seems distracted sometimes. How is their generation observably different to ours, and what's the best techniques to impart knowledge and instructions? So there's a few things there.
Okay, so thank you, Malva. You did.
So I was just going to say, in fairness to everybody, Nollaig's had this question prior, so it's not like she has to.
Oh, come on, Betty.
Oh no, I do. I have to remember it.
No, she hasn't. I changed it.
So Malva sent that through, and I just broke it up. Look, I love this question. I absolutely love this question because, you know, we need to get over this generational issue. And it's saying millennials are flaky and they've got no consistency, and the youth of today, look, our parents said the same about us. We have no work ethic. How will you amount to anything? What am I going to do with you? This is the generation conflict. Now, the employment pool is not getting older. It's only getting younger. You know, there's people, we're going to be accepting generation after generation into the workplace. You need to be flexible to take that on. So this is a bit like saying there are no good employees out there. And my challenge is there's a lack of good employers. If you want to it's no good saying the next generation is no good, they're rubbish. It's saying the next generation is different. And if I expect them to be in my business and to contribute to my business, I need to learn and understand that difference so I can communicate effectively. And that comes straight back to Bernie's previous question. What message am I selling? How am I selling the message to get it across to the people who are listening to me? So there's an insight there from the person who asked the question, should we be communicating by text? Ask your staff how they best receive information. You know, there's any number of very simple, and don't hang your hat on any of these things, I don't mean that at all, but there are any number of very simple online measures that will demonstrate if somebody is visual in their learning, so they like videos, they like pictures. If somebody is auditory, they like you to explain it, or if somebody is kinesthetic, they're hands-on and they want to learn how to do it. And we will talk more about this in one of the other sessions. But, you know, ask the person, how do they like to receive? And it's very dismissive to say somebody doesn't have the same information retention that I have. You know, that's a value judgment. And if you think that, you're basically saying, I'm better than you. And of course, you're going to have resistance, because if you believe that, you will portray that. As much as you try to be noble and act it out, you will display that feeling to the person who's listening to you, because it'll involve things like, have you forgotten already? And, you know, it's your tone will come across, your body language will come across. So stepping back and saying, these people are different to me, because you know what? Everybody is different. And situational leadership is about clearly understanding that every time I deal with somebody, I am dealing with a new situation and I have to respond differently. How do we do that? For people who are going, what are you talking about? I've got to change my behavior. You do not speak the same way to the postman that you do to your wife. You do not speak the same way to your bank manager as you do to the policeman. You do not speak the same way to the policeman as you do to your children. You know, we are highly adaptable. We read the person in front of us and we decide how we're going how we're going to communicate with them. But here's the thing: having people that you've invested in to work in your business, sit down and get to know them. Ask them how they want to be communicated with. Don't dismiss them because they think differently to you. Engage them, embrace them because they think differently to you. Because if they think differently to you, they will see solutions to problems that you can't see. The thinking that caused the problem cannot solve the problem. So having somebody who thinks differently to you is brilliant. So we really need, as an industry and across all sectors, to say, the new employees coming into us are different. What is different about them, and how can we use that? How can we leverage that? The insight there about the texting, you know, if that's how somebody prefers to get information, brilliant. I personally don't enjoy a phone call. I'd much prefer to email. I wouldn't consider myself incapable of retaining information. I would just say that that's my preference for how I share information. So we need to understand how people do things. You know, the observational differences in generations. Let's forget about differences and look at commonalities. They are people. They need to be fed, they need to be watered, they need sleep, they have emotions. The human has not progressed dramatically, you know, in the last 25 years. We still have all the fundamental basics. So if you go to a point of saying, what do we have in common? And if there are differences, how can we leverage those differences to improve what we have in common? That's going to be a fantastic relationship. And people will want to work with you because you're not dismissing who they are, you're taking the time to engage. And by the way, you can't do any of that if you do not have time in the system. So we're straight back to that idea there. You need time in the space and the system to understand the people you're working with, to understand how they communicate. And I mentioned it earlier, you know, telling off to one person is like water off a duck's back. The next person will be really embarrassed and make sure they never do it again. Unless you take the time to understand the people working with you, you won't understand that. So for everybody today, ignore the differences, work on the positives, put a common objective in place, the betterment of your business, moving forward together as a positive working relationship.
Fantastic answer there, Nollaig. And from a 55-year-old participant, he said, bravo, great response. So well done.
Thank you.
We do have, we are 5 minutes over. There is one very final question. It is saying, after several discussions of poor performance with no improvement on performance, when do you give a written warning?
Okay, excellent. So first of all, we do our major feedback loop and we say, this poor performance, what is it down to? You know, what's the root cause analysis? Am I expecting too much of this person? Is this person really never going to be the unit manager? Do I desperately want this person to have that capacity, but they just don't? So we have to have that very honest conversation with ourselves. I will, in one of the next, I think it's the next one or the one after it, give you a model of where somebody might be and how you would move them along. And at some point you have to cut your losses and say, this is time for a written warning now because somebody isn't listening to me. And I've done everything. By the way, if you've told somebody to do something 1,000 times and they don't do it, that's your problem, because you are not getting the message that your message isn't working. So we need to reach it, you know, how do you tap into that person? So for example, I work across all sectors. If I'm speaking to dairy farmers, I typically talk about cows. I would describe something in terms of cows. You've got to understand what makes that person. And if they're not understanding you, how do you change the message? Are you busy talking at that person and they're a visual person? So if, you know, what I would say to, if you feel you have a member of staff that you're just not getting through to, I would pick a date in the calendar, and I would do everything I could between now and then to get the best out of that person. So I would try different things. I would say, okay, I've explained it this way, it didn't work. I know this person loves loves motor racing. I know they love rugby. I know they love, you know, whatever, phones. Maybe I can try to describe it a different way. Put a deadline on it. Give it an honest effort where you do your best to get the best out of that person. And then at that point say, okay, beyond this point, I can't do anything. It's time for the written warning. I've done everything I can to get that through. Or maybe you identify somebody else in the business who is really good at explaining to that person. So look for options that if it's not working, what is it about you that means it's not working? How can you change the story? How can you engage others to help with that story? So that's number one. That's being really honest. That's being really fair. That's holding yourself accountable first. Top marks employer skill set. And then you just say to yourself, what can my business tolerate? And how long is this learning curve? And if you reflect back over, if you're fortunate enough to be assisted that has employees for a long time, say realistically, I know between, let's say I'm the best because I've been in the business for the longest time, so I can't put people to me because I've farmed here since I was 2. So what's a good level? And then you work it down and you say, okay, beyond that, I can't actually hold on to this person. And then we move towards removing that person, which may start off with that written warning. Yeah.
Thanks again, Nollaig. Look, there is another one there. This will be the last one. Do you think we generally have been running our dairy businesses too lean with staff to focus on them enough?
Do you know what's absolutely amazing? Yes, lean, two contradictory concepts. Lean in terms of the numbers of staff, slack in terms of our holding staff accountable, so slack in terms of holding on to somebody because there's somebody rather than the right person. You know, year down the line going, I knew first day this person wasn't right, and that's just, it's just excruciating in farming. And a lot of it is for the right reasons. You know, I give them a chance. You know, I can't, you know, it's not humane to do that. I can't just get rid of people. But we need to have that culling policy in place that we think about. You know, you don't hold a cow that doesn't work for your herd. We need to have the understanding of what's right for your business, and something that Bernie and I discussed, and I know Bernie kind of buys into this idea of this confirmation bias. You know within, Harvard say you will know within 4 seconds of a new experience what you think of that experience. So they know it from how the brain lights up during functional MRI scanning. So when you meet somebody, if your gut reaction is negative, you will never erode that. You will never overturn that judgment. So we need that really strict. We need to be leaner on how. So we're lean in terms of we don't have enough staff, but we're not lean enough in terms of if we only have so many staff, we're not picking the right people. We're not holding out for the right person. And that's tough to hear because I just want somebody to relieve work. You know, your good members of staff will wait for the right person rather than take the wrong person. They will carry the burden of weight, they carry the burden of work until you get the right person much sooner than they will carry somebody who shouldn't be there. So yes, we are too lean in terms of the numbers that we have. We need to rethink what employment looks like. Why couldn't you have a number of part-time people? On that, and this, sorry, Bernie's going to cry, it's going to be a longer answer than it should be. On that, you know, we need to value our own ability more. Farmers are very poor at believing that somebody is worth an amount of money because that job is really easy to the farmer. We undervalue the things that we are good at. We pay a lot more money for expertise. So I go into a business, and I was in a business, a farmer had recommended me, and I quoted a price, and they never challenged it. Now this business is a really good business, really tight, but because they don't fully understand what I do or my skill set, they didn't challenge my price. But yet within their own business, they were reluctant to pay people more. They were reluctant to give increases because the answer was, but that's an easy job. I could do that in 2 minutes. So we need to value our own work more so that we are willing to have more staff and to pay more. But we also, so that's being less lean in terms of numbers, but we need to be much leaner in terms of who we allow and keep in our business. So, you know, having a culling policy with staff as well. And it'll take a couple of years of churning through to understand who the right person is. But the more you keep the right person and understand who the right person is, the more you'll attract the right person because you'll spot them. you'll know who to look for, and you'll stop taking the wrong person. And then we get a really robust system that is lean in process and correctly lean in people. You've got the right amount of people, and they're the right people.
Well done, Nollaig. Fantastic. Thanks for very thorough answers to those questions, and I'm sure that everybody got an enormous amount out of that.